But we're working on some similar things. So the main part of it we've been grinding on is his trail elbow. So you'll see in this bottom one, this is from a couple months ago. So he's made a bunch of changes, but his trail elbow kind of chicken wings and flares and gets back behind him. For him, it's his left arm. And then on the way down, then he gets jammed up and stuck, and you'll kind of notice his body has to slow down and dip back, and his hands have to catch up. So we'll go through that. This bottom one is that one, and he's wearing pretty much the same outfit, but you can see
Yeah,
the
I was noticing that.
club rolls inside a little, and you can already see like his forearms are starting to get pretty separated from one another early into the golf swing. Wide triangle at the top, right? Like this elbow is a little bit flared behind him. Other than that, pretty solid. Decent plane on the way down, but you can see in that frame that trail elbow is jammed up, really jammed up. And then he kind of has to slow his body down in order for his arms to catch up as he goes through the golf ball. You ready for this transformation? So good. So we've been doing he actually came up with making a bunch of cross-handed rehearsals, right? Because when you have it normal, it's easy for this top
Yes.
one to kind of get going up like this. But when you cross-hand it, it's like this thing has to be down, tucked in front of you. And we worked on like a bunch of other drills and feels, but takeaways way better.
Wow.
And then that top position,
I mean, that's night and day different.
and that thing's tucked in front of him. And then he wants to hit a fade. So I want to get him a touch shallower than we are right here. But if you're trying to hit a fade from there, that's pretty dang good. And then you'll be able to notice he gets through the ball a ton better, in my opinion, because the arms are there and in front of him as he goes through the ball. And then I'll bring in the face on. It's really easy to see from the face on as well. It's almost sometimes when you're working on trail elbow stuff, the face on is better.
I'm curious, were you talking with Brandon about like various misses he was seeing before and what he's seen after? What were the commonalities between, what was he doing before and what ball flight was that producing versus now? Like, has he seen a lot of improvements with what the ball is doing?
For sure. So he likes to hit a little bit of a fade. And when that trail elbow and his arms get up and going behind him, and then they get stuck behind his body, a lot of the time it's for him as a lefty starting left and then kind of going that way. So it's a push fade for him, especially when those arms get behind, club face can get open, and then like you're trying to do it with your hands too much. For me, what I always try to work with my students on, like quote unquote, the philosophy is keeping it in front of you all the way back and having a really solid top position. And then from there, since they're already in front, you can just turn and burn, rotate your body, control the club face and everything that you're doing through rotation on the way through, so you don't have to have extra movement with like the smaller muscles, right? Like it's a lot easier to control everything with your core and your hips and your butt, honestly, like rotating through the golf ball, even your chest a little bit versus your arms and your hands trying to control that club face going. I mean, with a driver for some guys going 115 gets really difficult.
Absolutely.
Let me get this out of the way. The bottom one again is the before, right? So you can see once we get to the top, that arm is already kind of getting up. Like you can see a lot of that trail arm.
Exactly.
And then kind of crunches down into it. And you can see it's already jammed up behind his body there, jammed up. And then his body's got to slow down. You see him kind of tip back and a little bit of flip there.
Yes.
Right? And then with this top one now, so good. Like the amount of change that he's been able to make. And he's an athlete too, so he knows how to make the switches. But you can already see there that arm's starting to fold in front of him. The lead form is
on the other side. Exactly.
Yeah. And now there's no gap there. I mean, that's tour player level in my opinion.
That's a huge adjustment.
Now in those frames, it's already starting to get more down in front of his body, in front of his hip here. And then there's no stall. He has a lot more extension through the golf ball as he rotates on and through.
That's awesome.
So now since it's more in front, he's noticed hitting the fade, it's a lot easier for him to start the ball for him to the right and get it to fade back to the left since his arms are more in front versus when it was getting stuck behind. He could kind of get a two-way miss going, but mostly it was like kind of a swipey, weak fade with those arms stuck. But yeah, he's noticed it. Awesome. There were some growing pains for sure. Like there were like a couple times we were trying to work on it and find different drills and feels, and like it wasn't resonating and going right. So like that stuff is always a process. Kind of what I always say to all my students that I work with is like, I can give you the drills and I can give you the options to get there, but ultimately like you're the player, and I could have one drill that works for 99 people in a row, but it might not work for you. Like we might have to find a different feel, a completely different way to frame it in order to get to the actual results, right? Like the feel and the reel is always crazy, crazy different. But we've done a good job kind of eliminating some drills that didn't work, and just focusing big time on the ones that did. And his swing looks,
I mean, it looks amazing, and I'm sure from a mental standpoint, it's freed him. I'm sure it's freed him up a lot to have the freedom to continue to rotate and like not worry about the ball starting for him
Mhm.
to the left. Like he can kind of turn and burn, like you said,
Mhm.
start the ball to the right and let it peel back into the fairway. Like that's a really good place to be from a mental standpoint. And I know that feeling when you kind of feel like your body needs to slow down. It's not a good one because it's you don't have any control of the start line. You kind of lose control of the face and it kind of feels like you're already kind of trying to slap at it, try to save it,
Yeah.
and just hope the face, matches the path or is good according to the path. And you make a really good point about what you're talking about, as far as the feels and everything go. It's really interesting when I work with my coach. Like he is very good about asking me after we work on a new feel or a new move or new thought, whatever it is, about how does it resonate with you,
Mhm.
right? If I'm trying to keep the club face stronger in the backswing and not let it fly open, he thinks about it like right hand on top of left. I think about it just naturally being a stronger club
Mhm.
face,
Okay.
or
Yeah.
like keeping the eyes of the club face on the ball for longer.
Sure.
And so I don't really like the right hand on top feel, even though that will accomplish what I'm trying to do. It doesn't resonate in my mind.
Yeah.
And that just speaks to the point that you're talking about. Like the feel is really really important as a player because it might work when you're hitting into a simulator screen or hitting into a net or on the range. But there's a big difference between how everything works in your brain on the golf course.
For
We've
sure.
talked about that quite a bit, but that's awesome. The swing looks amazing
Yeah.
for Brennan, and y'all have been doing great work.
Yeah. He's been putting some work in, and that kind of to that point, right? Like taking it from the range versus golf course. Sometimes when you're on the range and you're like really focusing on the mechanics and forcing it, like that's a super extreme feel. You don't always want to take that out there. So like him focusing on his trail elbow a bunch in the simulator is great, but then when he gets on the golf course, maybe he plays better golf when it's just like, okay, smooth tempo on the way back or
Yeah,
something super simple, or
exactly.
just focusing on the shot at hand, whatever. That's again a thing that's super individualized for guys. Because there's some, I mean, PGA Tour players that think about 5 different things in order to get where they
Right.
want. And there's other guys that think about one or nothing.
Nothing.
So
Exactly.
it's really about finding the recipe, is what my coach always said. Finding the
For
right recipe for you.
For sure. And the last thing I would add on to that, and something that's helped me, in times where I'm like really working on my swing, because it's really easy to get like, looking at video all the time. You're taking a ton of videos. You're just trying to you feel like you're micromanaging too many parts of the swing. You're, playing aesthetics essentially,
Mm-hmm.
whereas, function is what really matters. And, obviously the way your swing looks is a factor into that formula. You have to be able to make a predictable motion and stabilize the path and club face to create good results. And hitting certain positions help you do that. But for me, one thing that's really helped not get too far in that side of the spectrum is have a very clear intent on the range.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm out there, it's really important for me to not fall into the I'm just going to try to make my swing look good.
For
I
sure.
have to go out there and say, okay, I'm going to hit this 7-iron. It's going to go 185 yards in the air. 100 feet in the apex, and it's going to cut 5 yards starting at that pine tree out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like having a very clear, and sure, I can think about a mental thought or a feel that I'm trying to work on, but I don't want to lose what's happening out on the range because that's what good results and good golf come
Yeah.
from. It's what happens out there, not you
Yeah.
don't get paid for how well you execute that swing move.
No, yeah, it's what the golf ball is doing. That's another thing that him and I did, right? Was we were focusing so much on the mechanics, which you have to do when you're trying to make a swing change. But then once we got to a point where it was getting closer, he kind of came to me and was like, okay, like, especially with him being in the simulator, he's up north, can't go play. It's like, okay, how do I also mix some of this in? And then I showed him the TrackMan combine that you can do on the simulator. So it's like, okay, for if you have an hour in the sim, 15 minutes of just mechanics, do the drills that you like, use the training aids, and then do the combine for a little bit and hit some numbers. You can even go like play some holes on the simulator and then like close it off by doing the 9 window drill. The
Yeah,
low
it's
fade,
great.
low straight, low draw, medium, 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 high, high, high. And like that's always really good, because then you can kind of make the mechanical changes that you want, but then translate it into, looking at the results and putting yourself more in a play golf mind frame.